Hello, my friends. This is Dr. M here with you again with intermediate microeconomics support. And what we're going to do today, as you see from those slides that we'll go through in a short period of time, is we'll talk about compensated CV and equivalent EV variations. It's basically an extension of discussion when it comes to measuring the price impact, such as substitution and income effect that we discussed previously. And lastly, we talked about homothetic preferences as a matter of review. And just to give you a quick refresher, we discussed that men and women are not created the same. There are significance in terms of their preferences. When husband wants to watch soap opera, and in reality he doesn't. He wants to watch football game, but the wife wants to watch soap opera. So they're fighting over remote control, and basically that is manifestation of their differences in terms of preferences. So if they are created differently in terms of preferences, and otherwise, say biologically, we cannot really argue about equality between two people that are created differently. So there is a talented person, let's say male, and there is not so talented male. Can you treat them the same? No, of course not, because they are different in terms of what they can do. And similar, husband and wife, male and female, if you treat them equally, which is very misleading, it would be equivalent to say that you would expect male to give birth to children equally as women do, or to breastfeed children equally as women do, but in fact you can't, and thus they are different. And there will be always a variation, some residuals that will constitute this difference between their preferences. Now you can ask me, how do you then relate them in terms of each other? And I have a good analogy for you that might be helpful. Think about eyes and hands. Your own eyes and your own hands, they belong to one body. And you would not dare try to think that eyes can substitute hands. They have a very different function. You try to grab a hammer with your eyes. Can you do that? But you can do it with your hands. So if you, let's say, driving a nail into the wall with your hands, and that's what your hands can do better than your eyes, obviously. But your eyes are engaged because your eyes are watching out, making sure that you are not going to miss and hit your hand with the hammer as opposed to the nail. And watch what happens next. Let's say you missed it and you hurt your hands. The response, your eyes are crying. And when your eyes are crying, what do? You reach with your hands to wipe the tears. Do you see synergy between eyes and your hands? It's a great way how eyes protect hands in terms of making a precise drive of nail to the wall, and how hands protect eyes. When sunshine is right into your eyes, you extend your hand to block sunshine to protect your eyes. So I want you to understand that they are valuable in their own way. And the same with men and women that have very unique functions. And if you want to think about that in terms of family, the best way to make this successful union, whether it's related to the family or the merger between the two firms, such as merger and acquisition, you want to rely on this unique function of one firm versus the other, or male versus female, and you want to use that as a compensatory, as a, if you will, not in terms of substitutes, because they're not substitutable, but in a complementary way, just like your eyes complementing your hands, and your hands complementing your eyes. Look in how beautiful fashion, when your eyes are crying, hands wipe the tears, and they're equally protecting each other, and they are responsible. Can you say they are equal? Never you can say that, because they have a totally different function. So those things have to be recognized. Now we can move on to compensated and equivalent variation. Let's go to the willingness to pay, and that would be compensated variation, and willingness to accept payment would be equivalent variation. By the end of the day, we want to understand what is the difference between the two, and if they are indeed can be treated as the same. So let me start slowly here. I'm going to look at the market for freedom, and I will determine some things that are important when it comes to freedom. Freedom, just like any other commodity that is associated with the price and the quantity. So what you have in front of you is freedom that used to be available in the former Soviet Union, that is relatively higher priced, and there is less of it available. And in the United States, in comparison, you have a lower priced and there's more available. So every time I travel with my friends overseas to some distant places that have a lot of restrictions, my friends 100% of the time tell me that they will never take freedom for granted anymore. So if you want to have people appreciate freedom, take it away from them. And in fact, when cities and states and countries go on a lockdown because of coronavirus in 2020, that translates into the similar experiences when the freedom is taken away. And we talked about the freedom is as being not something that you do what you want. You always have constraints, but the degree of freedom, where you can go and what you can eat and what you can do, substantially subsiding on the lockdown of the city, the state, or the entire country. And at that moment, people appreciate freedom a lot, significantly more. So what I want to do next, I want to talk about a little bit of fair pricing when it comes to market compensation, because there are some ambiguities that in existence. So what we want to do is, let's suppose that you want to compare compensation for any famous sports player versus teacher, like myself, for instance. And some may argue that teachers are compensated so much significantly less than sports players that it is unfair. Well, Dr. M doesn't quite agree with that, and simply because you are comparing oranges and apples. There are a lot of teachers, and that means that what I am doing with that presentation, someone else can do it, although my presentations are unique, but there is some degree of substitution that someone else can deliver a flow of information that is being presented to you. Now, if you were to take Michael Jordan, that would be more a unique asset that is expressed in terms of his skills. And because of his unique asset, he is one of a kind, and that is priced very differently than there are many teachers that are around. And those two cannot be compared. Now, you can argue whether society is entitled to price compensation of Michael Jordan in comparison with a teacher when it comes to meaningful job and changing lives of other people. But that would be related more to the values that society is placing. So if society is valuing more entertainment than, let's say, religiosity or societal values, maybe patriotism or altruism or anything else for that matter, then you can argue that society does value entertainment. People just want to be entertained. And that's been always around, and it's been always appreciated even from the Roman Empire when people demanded two things. One was entertainment, and the other one was food. All right, now we are ready, after talking about compensated variation in terms of compensation that teachers and sports figures receive. Now we can talk about more in detail CV and EV, compensated variation and equivalent variation. So let me draw this graph that is in front of you by hand. This way I think you can track much better in terms of technicality of it. So I'm going to my notepad here, and let's do this. We're going to talk about two universities that are located next to each other. One is Bethel University, hypothetically, and the other one is Northwestern University, hypothetically. So they're both located in a very close proximity with each other. And what we can consider is the following. Let's suppose that Bethel students wanted to have a greater access to continental travel to Europe and travel around the States. And in this case, we can look at air travel as one good, and X2 will be all other goods, composite commodity. So we are going to do the budget constraint here, and we're going to have a difference curve at point A. You have seen this so many times, so it should come very easy for you. So, and because Bethel students want to have easy access to air travel, so they can go and travel overseas, travel around continental United States, then they want to build airport, small airport, right between Northwestern University and Bethel University. Let's say there's a street that connects two schools called Snelling Avenue. So in this case, the price for air travel for Bethel University students will go down. Now they have access to this newly built airport on Snelling Avenue that is close to University of Northwestern University, and that will push the indifference curve to the point of tangency to be at point B. So again, you have seen this before. Now we want to ask this question: how much money Bethel students are willing to pay to build the airport on Snelling Avenue right next to the Northwestern University. So, and you take the new budget constraint, that is dotted line, and you move until the point of tangency with the original indifference curve, as if you were trying to find substitution and income effect. And that's going to be your point C. So you remember from previous presentations, moving from A to C is your substitution effect, and from C to B is your income effect. And it's a normal good case, price decrease. So right here is your compensated variation that is measured in terms of x2, or you can also do the same and measure that in terms of x1. Here's your CV. So CV can be measured in terms of x1 or in terms of x2. That's your compensated variation. So again, it is answering the question, how much Bethel students are willing to pay to build the airport on Snelling Avenue. Now, the problem is arising twofold, because Northwestern University students would resist this project of building airport on Snelling Avenue right next to them, because an airport is producing negative externality such as pollution and noise, and this is not very conducive to educational process. So they would prefer that they would have no airport on Snelling Avenue. And now you have a dispute between Bethel University students and Northwestern University students. Such disputes arise at the marketplace all the time between the firms. In fact, one example comes to mind is International Airport in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities, Minnesota. Every time airport wants to expand, in fact, the neighbors are resisting such expansion because of the same reasons, pollution and noise. An airport has to provide compensation to pacify those neighbors so they can build soundproof walls, so they can go to Hawaii or on vacation of any type. So they are distributing cash as a compensation. So now the question is how much cash they should pay. In order to answer this question, you start at point B for Northwestern University students because you start at a low price. And once they build the airport, the academic life for Northwestern students from this university is going to be more expensive. And thus you are moving from B to A. So it's an opposite shift. And the question now is how much cash Bethel University students should pay to students at Northwestern University to compensate them for the pain and suffering of their tolerance of the airport on Snelling Avenue. You take the new budget constraint at point A and you move it to the point of tangency, original indifference curve, and that will look like this. So this is your point D. Right here is your equivalent variation measured in terms of x2, and right here this is your equivalent variation measured in terms of x1. Done deal. So, and that's the graph that you have in front of you on the slide right here. So you have CV and EV is being measured. Again, CV is measuring how much money Bethel University is willing to pay to build the airport, and EV is related to compensation, a willingness to accept payment by Northwestern University students in order to tolerate such atrocity of small airport on Snelling Avenue. All right, now you can take this CV and EV and project it as you see it on the demand function, and thus you can actually measure the demand function as we have done it previously. It's just a refresher for you. You can move the price for X going up or down, and it takes only 2 points to draw the demand function in this case. So you can estimate the demand for this airport. And here's the good question that I have for you. At any moment, would you say that CV is greater than EV or less or equal than EV? So if you were to compare CV and EV from the previous manual drawing and explanation, what would you say how do they compare with each other? That is a very interesting question, and I think the best way to think through this question is to go through some examples. Let's suppose that you want to build a bridge across the Mississippi River. And obviously the bridge is built for the purpose to reduce the price of traveling. You want to cross the Mississippi River faster, more convenient, and it saves you a lot of resources to do so. So you are willing to pay $900,000 to build a bridge, and that would be standing for compensated variation. Now, the question becomes, what is EV? Equivalent variation in this case. Equivalent variation in this case would be how much you are willing to pay or accept the payment to prevent the bridge from blowing up. And on average, people are willing to pay more to keep the bridge from collapsing. Let's say $1 million. That's an interesting question. Why? Why people are more willing to pay for something that is being already in place and a part of their life versus to build this originally, to import that into the life. And some of the explanations could be psychological by nature. It could be some personal insecurities, some maybe attachments, maybe sentimental value. There are a host of many factors, but you see that CV and EV do not have to be equivalent at all. Now we can go to Laspeyres and Page indexes. Laspeyres and Page indexes are very famous because Laspeyres is related to compensated variation and Page related to equivalent variation. Laspeyres is the index that allows you to rely on the market baskets as opposed to indifference curves as you have been accustomed to see. Now, indifference curves, they are more precise by nature to reflect the taste and preferences, but because there are still difficulties to measure the indifference curves, in real life you rely on those indexes to capture the differences. And Page is a similar way. So they are fairly equivalent when it comes to approach of taking the measurements, because both are relying on market baskets, the tangible thing that you can go out and measure as opposed to an indifference curve. But indifference curve would be more precise measurement, and thus Laspeyres and Page will always be biased, always, because they either overstate or they understate. Like, for example, most companies index compensation of their employees, maybe to keep up with inflation, to keep up with the cost of living, and many other things. So how do you know what should be the index? And this index is capturing the cost of living, either measured by Laspeyres or Page. And in this case, both indexes do a good job, but they only limited to the market basket. The more appropriate and more precise from methodology point perspective should be indifference curve. Thus, companies end up either compensating more than they should because of the biasness of Laspeyres and Page, or they underpaying than they should, much less than they should. And that's because of Laspeyres and Page biasness. All right, so now that would also dictate the marginal rate of substitution, which is the ratio of marginal utilities. What I would like to do now is to stop at this point, because we will talk about quasi-rents once we come back. You have a very healthy day, my friends. We'll talk soon.